You sit down to do it. The thing you've been meaning to do all day. Maybe it's a work task you've been putting off, or an email you've drafted in your head a dozen times, or a project that actually matters to you. You sit down. You open the tab. And then nothing happens. You close the tab. You pick up your phone. You tell yourself you'll start in 10 minutes. An hour goes by. You haven't started. And the worst part? You hate yourself a little for it. But what's actually happening inside you right now is far more interesting than laziness, and it has nothing to do with discipline. The word lazy is one of the most misleading labels you can attach to a human being. It implies a deliberate choice to do nothing, a conscious refusal to engage. But when you sit down to work and feel that invisible wall between you and the task, that's not a choice. That's your nervous system doing something very specific for reasons that made perfect sense at some point in your life. Let's start with what scientists actually know about this. Your brain has two systems that are almost always in some kind of negotiation. The first is the limbic system, which is your emotional brain. It processes threat, reward, memory, and feeling. The second is the prefrontal cortex, the part just behind your forehead, which handles planning, focus, and what psychologists call executive function, meaning your ability to organize thoughts, initiate tasks, and follow through. Here's the thing. The prefrontal cortex is slower. It's more deliberate. And when the limbic system senses something uncomfortable, it can effectively pull the brake on the prefrontal cortex before you've even consciously registered what happened. You don't decide not to start. Your brain decides for you in milliseconds based on signals you didn't even know it was reading. What kind of signals? That's where it gets interesting. One of the most consistent findings in motivation research is that procrastination isn't about time management. It's about emotion management. A 2013 study by researcher Fushia Siroa and Timothy Feikel found that when people procrastinate, they're not avoiding the task itself. They're avoiding the emotions they associate with the task. The stress of possibly failing. The discomfort of not knowing where to start. The vague sense of dread that this thing will expose something inadequate about you. The emotional weight of the task activates the limbic system, which sends a quiet but powerful signal. Not now. Not safe. Wait. And so you wait. And then you wait some more. This is why willpower rarely works. You can't think your way out of a nervous system response. Telling yourself to just focus when your brain has flagged a task as emotionally dangerous is like trying to talk yourself out of flinching when something flies at your face. The flinch is faster than the thought. Now, there's another layer to this, and it explains why some people struggle far more than others. Researchers studying ADHD have found that the condition is fundamentally about difficulty with emotional regulation and reward sensitivity, not just attention. Dr. Russell Barkley, one of the leading researchers in ADHD, has described it as a disorder of self-regulation, where the brain's ability to delay a feeling and start a task is impaired at a neurological level. The dopamine system, which is the brain's reward tracking network, doesn't fire the same way. Tasks that feel distant, uncertain, or unrewarding in the immediate term don't generate the neurochemical motivation to begin. But here's what's important. No, you don't need an ADHD diagnosis to experience this. The same dopamine system governs all human motivation. Stress depletes it. Poor sleep disrupts it. Burnout flattens it. And a long enough history of criticism, perfectionism, or environments where effort wasn't rewarded can actually recalibrate it, so that your brain learns, slowly and unconsciously, that starting something is rarely worth the risk. Think about that. Your brain learned this from experience. If you grew up in a home where your efforts were criticized more than encouraged, your nervous system learned that showing your work means exposure to judgment. If you had a teacher who made you feel stupid in front of others, your brain cataloged that as a threat. If you worked incredibly hard on something and watched it fail or go unrecognized, your reward system noted that effort does not reliably produce good feelings. And so, over time, the act of beginning something became entangled with a quiet, body-wide sense of risk. This is not a character flaw. This is learning. This is your brain being efficient. The psychologist Carol Dweck, whose decades of research on mindset has reshaped how educators think about learning, found that people who believe ability is fixed, what she calls a fixed mindset, are far more likely to avoid tasks where failure is possible. Because failure to a fixed mindset brain means something permanent. It means you're not smart enough, not talented enough, not enough. Avoidance becomes self-protection. Not starting means you can't fail. You can't be judged, you stay safe. And the terrible irony is that the things you most want to do, the projects that matter the most to you, the creative work, the ambitious goals, those are often the ones hardest to start. Because they carry the most weight. They're most connected to your identity. If you write that thing and it's bad, it means something. So your brain, trying to protect you, keeps finding reasons to delay. The blank page is not neutral. It's loaded. So what actually helps? Because you're not here for a diagnosis, you're here for something you can use. The first thing that research consistently supports is lowering the activation energy of starting. Psychologist B.J. Fogg at Stanford has spent years studying how behavior actually changes. And one of his central findings is that the biggest obstacle to action is not motivation, it's friction. Friction is anything that makes starting feel harder than it needs to be. The solution isn't to push harder. It's to make starting so small that your limbic system doesn't have time to raise the alarm. This means the goal is not to start the project. The goal is to open the document, to write one sentence, to set one timer for 10 minutes and see what happens. When the action is small enough, it bypasses the threat detection system. You slip under the radar. And often, once you begin, the resistance dissolves. Because the brain that was bracing for something painful discovers that it's actually okay. This is sometimes called the Zeigarnik Effect, named after Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who found in the 1920s that the human brain actually fixates on unfinished tasks, tracking them with a kind of background tension. Once you start, your brain wants to finish. The problem has never been staying with the task. The problem is getting past that first moment. Make the first moment tiny and you'll discover you had the capacity all along. The second thing that helps is separating the task from the story about the task. The task is, write 200 words. The story is, if this isn't good, I'm a failure. The task is, send this email. The story is, they're going to think I'm incompetent. Your nervous system doesn't respond to the task. It responds to the story. And the story is almost always more frightening than what's actually being asked of you. Cognitive behavioral therapy, developed by psychiatrist Aaron Beck, is built on exactly this insight. Beck discovered that emotional suffering often isn't caused by events directly, but by the automatic thoughts layered over those events. When you're unable to start something, there is almost always an automatic thought running underneath. That you'll do it wrong. That it won't be good enough. That trying reveals something unflattering about you. Naming the thought, making it explicit, pulling it out of the background noise, takes some of its power away. You can look at it and ask, is this actually true? Or is this my nervous system doing what nervous systems do? This isn't easy, but it's workable, and it gets easier with practice. The third thing, be careful about how you talk to yourself when you don't start. This matters more than most people realize. Research by Dr. Kristen Neff at the University of Texas has shown that self-compassion, treating yourself with the same care you'd show a friend who was struggling, actually improves follow-through and resilience more effectively than self-criticism. The internal voice that says, "You're pathetic, you're so lazy, why can't you just do it?" That voice is not your coach. It is another threat, another signal to your nervous system that something is very wrong. And under threat, your nervous system shuts down further. The voice that helps sounds different. It says, "This is hard. A lot of people struggle with this. What's one small thing you could do right now?" You don't need to fix everything about the way your brain works. You just need to get through the next 10 minutes. And here is where things come back around. You sat down this morning, or this afternoon, or tonight, and you couldn't start. You felt the resistance and immediately called it laziness. But now you know what was actually happening. Your brain was protecting you from something it learned was dangerous. From judgment, from failure, from the gap between who you are and who you think you should be. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't weakness. It was a very old, very tired system doing the only thing it knows how to do. You're not broken. You're not lazy. You're someone whose nervous system has learned some things that aren't serving you anymore. And that's not a fixed state. That's something that can change, one small start at a time. You sat down to do it. Now you know why that was the hardest part.